D&D number 3, Finding Home in Jesus' Name, Chapter 9. Lisa sat carefully on the edge of her bed. Raising a trembling hand, she pushed the hair out of her face. What happened? What had she done? Did she accidentally blurt out the words she'd been thinking? I love you, Charles Anthony Stewart III? She'd been in the throes of passion. Had she spoken without realizing it? And if she had, would those words really have had this effect on Chaz? Well, of course they would. He's a man, and men hate commitment, don't they? The words, I love you, scare men. So had she spoken those words and he turned tail and run? Or maybe it wasn't that at all. Maybe it was just her. She hadn't inspired real love in anyone who'd been in her life. Not her mother, not Glenn. She thought a relationship with Chaz would be different. She'd certainly never felt so much so fast for anyone. She'd considered that the defect had been in Lou and Glenn, not her. But maybe she was wrong. Maybe it was her. She stood and went to the mirror. Everyone she meets tells her she's pretty, even beautiful. She tried to see it. Turning side to side, she tried to see herself objectively. Looking past the skinny, awkward girl she usually saw, she tried to see the beauty. Not too bad looking, she thought. So, is that it? She looks good, so she must not have a real soul with real feelings? Use her and discard her? Is that what she inspires in people? And she plays right into it, doesn't she? She gave herself pretty readily to Chaz. If he'd wanted her, she would have given herself completely. She certainly didn't make him work too hard to get what he wanted. But even before that happened, he'd discarded her pretty darn fast. He'd simply turned away. Guess he decided he didn't want her after all. The anger bubbled up fast and hot. She spewed a few names. Boy, you really played it well. You had me completely snowed. She stomped her foot. More curses. Her gaze caught a mark on the side of her throat, and she moved closer to the mirror. Her hand moved to touch the side of her neck where he'd marked her. Tears welled in her eyes, but only for a moment. Furiously, she ripped off her clothing, Major League pitching it into the corner of the room, grabbed her robe and headed to the bathroom, intending to wash away every last clue he'd left on her body and her mind. New scene. Days later, on Wednesday morning, a knock on the back door had Maddie and Lisa raising their heads from the detailed discussion they were having at the breakfast table. Come in, Chaz, Maddie called. Lisa tensed, but she wouldn't look away. No, she had some pride. The door opened and he stepped in, taking his Stetson from his head in a polite gesture. He'd worn it the day they'd first met, and her heart lurched. He smiled at Maddie, and then his eyes met hers. She raised her eyebrows and gave her haughtiest expression. His mouth pressed together in a straight line, his jaw clenched, and the look in his eyes could only be classified as hurt. Well, good. Good morning, Chaz, Maddie said cheerfully. Come in, have breakfast. Help us celebrate. He cleared his throat. Sorry, Miss Maddie, can't. I got a lot to do. What are you celebrating? You are looking at the head chef for the Pine Forest Inn. Chaz forced a smile. She was beaming with pride. Well, now, that is a wonderful thing. We'll have to widen the road, maybe even pave it one day. There'll be so many people come to taste your fixins'. Aw, you go on, you big flirt. Pine Forest Inn, huh? He looked at Lisa. Sounds like quite an undertaking. She shrugged. Nothing I can't handle. He swallowed and turned his gaze back to Maddie. Maybe later, when I have more time, you can tell me all about it, Miss Maddie. I want to hear all the details. Right now, I just stopped by to let you know that your terrace garden is ready for you to plant. And if you'd like, I can take you to the nursery Friday afternoon, and you can pick out flowers to your heart's delight. That won't be necessary, Lisa said in clipped tones. I have plenty of time to take Grams to the nursery. We're a team now. We won't be needing you. Chaz's eyes lowered, and he nodded his head. Fine. Well, good morning to you. He opened the door. Maddie laughed. Of course we need Chaz. What would we do without our favorite man around to take care of us? Lisa didn't answer, feeling a bit guilty for the rude remark. Chaz looked back over his shoulder. Call me if you need me, Maddie. I got the screens back on the windows. Don't forget to lock them up. I won't be able to start on your new patio for a week or so. I will have to talk about the patio, Lisa said. There's a lot of remodeling to do, and the backyard will be a major part of it. He nodded again. Fine. We'll talk. He stepped out and closed the door. Chaz stood on the back porch staring out at nothing. He needed to see her. He needed to see if she was faring well. He'd waited 3 agonizing days, and what he saw was she was mad. Mad as hell. He was glad that her temper had kicked in. That would get her through. What he hadn't counted on was the pain that had slammed into his chest when he looked into her eyes. Beebe whinnied at him, bringing him out of his trance. Well, he had work to do. He mounted and rode off. New scene. Chaz pulled up to his parents' house Friday night. He drew a deep breath. This would not be fun. He went in the front door and made his way back to the kitchen, where he knew his mother would be happily cooking up a storm. She looked up the moment he entered the room. Hi, baby. He kissed her cheek. Hey, Mom. Lifting the lid of a large pot, he sniffed the contents. Spaghetti. Smells good. Your father's been feeling a little down, so I'm making his favorite. She placed bread in the oven and turned and looked him over. Here it comes. Just get it over with, he thought. So, honey, have you seen Lisa lately? I saw her briefly Wednesday morning, he said as casually as he could. And did you ask her to come to dinner Sunday? He looked down. It's not going to happen, Mom. She was quiet. She'd been hoping. He knew that. Hoping he would finally be able to pull out of it. She loved him, and he knew it probably hurt her as much as it did him to have those hopes dashed. She'd lost her grandchild and her daughter-in-law, and as she said many times over the last 3 years, she feels like she's losing him too. But what could he do? Chaz. She stopped. He could see her mind working, trying to figure out the best way to approach him, the best way to tiptoe around his fragile mind. She smiled up at him. What happened? Did you quarrel? The question was asked hopefully, because a quarrel would be easily brushed aside. No, not really. Running his hands through his hair, he blew out a breath in frustration. Look, Mom, I'm sorry. I tried, but I can't do it. I'm no good to anyone. That's not true. He looked up, but turned away quickly when his eyes moistened. It is. Accept it. He rushed out. New scene. Lisa pulled the last of the weeds from the mound of squash and paused to wipe her brow. Maddie had insisted she wear the silly gardening hat to keep the sun off her face, but it was hot and cumbersome, and looking around her where she knelt in the dirt, she had to smile. No one she knew in Los Angeles would ever believe that she was living the life of a farm girl. Here she was, dirty, sweaty, happily plucking weeds from a mound of dirt that would eventually be squash. Grams had taught her about squash, about beans, about cabbage and corn, cucumbers and tomatoes, peppers and okra. She was learning quickly. They had discussed the vegetable garden, deciding it could be a big selling point for the inn. Meals made with fresh, organically grown veggies, beef from the free-range cattle. People would eat it up, she thought, chuckling at her pun. If, that is, she could still acquire Chaz's participation. If not, she'd replace him with another local rancher. Jody and her husband John would be arriving by the end of June, and they would all sit down together with Maddie to finalize a plan of action. Lisa had already contacted a few contractors to put in bids for the work on the house. They had to add bathrooms and do a major kitchen makeover. The rest was merely cosmetic. The town was abuzz with the news since Maddie had told all her friends. Her father had been ecstatic and willing to help make her dream a reality in any way possible. She smiled at the thought of her new family. Shirley, her stepmom, was a pretty woman, slim and tall, with soft brown hair and eyes. She was kind and understanding and completely in love with her father. And it did Lisa's heart good to know that sometimes relationships do work out. Maddie had cooked Sunday dinner and invited Joe, Shirley, and Megan over. Lisa had been in heaven helping Maddie play hostess. She looked around the table at Joe and Shirley, Grams and Sweet Megan, and realized these people belonged to her. Only every once in a while did the happiness get clouded over by thoughts of Chaz. She frowned. Now here she was thinking of him again. He'd seemed downhearted last week when he'd stepped into Maddie's kitchen. She had expected him to gloat, to put on a cheerful front at the very least, but it seemed he hurt as much as she did, and she regretted sniping at him. She liked to think she wasn't a cruel person. Then again, maybe she was more like her mother than she thought. As if thinking about Chaz caused him to materialize, a shadow passed over her. Miss Maddie, you shouldn't be out here so long. At the sound of his voice, Lisa stood and turned around. His face fell. Oh, I thought you were Maddie. Obviously. He looked away uneasily and rubbed his hands against his thighs. Immediately contrite, she went on. It must be the hat, she said awkwardly. He nodded. Well, I'll get out of your way. Wait, I need to talk to you. He stopped, his heart beating a mile a minute. Should he chance a conversation, even a short one? Every word with her was painful. Looking at her tore him apart, and what if he broke down and told her everything? Sure, she would give him sympathy. She would probably stick by him. But is that what he wanted? No. He didn't want anyone to be with him out of pity. Damn it, he'd been over it. If he thought for one moment he'd not be able to be with Lisa without thinking about Carrie, he would never have pursued it. What is wrong with him? The truly scary thing is that he couldn't control it. Had he totally lost his mind? Still, though, he didn't really want to chance a conversation with Lisa, but he had to because, though he was many things, he was not a coward. He was a man who did what he thought he should do, no matter how hard. So he conceded, he swallowed, and nodded. Tossing the hat on the ground, she came outside the high fence that kept the deer from eating the vegetables. She reached up to smooth stray hairs back toward the single braid she wore. She hadn't expected him to agree to talk, so she had to quickly gather her thoughts. She wanted answers, or at the very least an apology, so she would start with one of her own. I'm sorry I was rude to you last week. He shrugged. It's okay. I hurt you, you hurt me back. And so that brings me to my next question. She paused, realizing instinctively that she needed to tread softly. Is there a particular reason you were so cold with me Saturday night? He blew out a breath. I didn't mean for things to turn out like they did. You didn't mean to kiss me or share time with me or whatever you want to call it? He swallowed hard. I meant to do that. So if you didn't mean for things to turn out like they did, then you didn't mean to hurt me? He nodded. If you didn't mean to hurt me, then you didn't have to. Chaz shook his head. He didn't know what to say. His heart wanted to comfort her, to make it all better, but he needed to make her hate him. He shrugged. Whatever you say. Well, thinking about what happened, it would seem that you wanted to get close to me and make me want to be with you and then toss me away. He nodded and sighed. What can I say? I'm a man. She stood silently watching him. I don't believe you. You believe what you want. Determined to get to the bottom of the thing, she changed tactics. You know, I thought it was me. I thought it was something I'd done or said to make you dump me so unceremoniously. I tried to figure out what it is about me that makes people feel like ripping out my heart and tossing it away without blinking an eye. What is it about me that inspires such intense dislike? I mean, this month, well, you know, it's been a really bad month. He sighed. He'd wanted her to hate him, not blame herself. He reached to touch her shoulder, but stopped himself when she flinched. It's not you, Lisa. It's nothing you did. It's me. She nodded her head. Okay, I'll accept that. I'll gladly accept that. But what about you? He shook his head. There are things that you don't know about me. Well, then tell me. Lisa, let me just say that you're better off without me. I'm no good for you, and if you hook up with me, it will ruin your life, and I won't be able to give you what you want. She was quiet while she considered his words. Supposing that's so, and I'll go on record saying that I don't believe that for a minute, nevertheless, supposing that it's so, why did you wait until after you'd made me fall for you to let me know? Here was his chance, he thought, to make her let go, to send her away for good. Look, Lisa, I know you think this is all about something deep. It's not. The truth is, I wanted you. I'm selfish like that. You're a hot babe, and I just wanted to see if I could get you. That's all there is to it. If he'd physically struck her, it would have been easier to take. She stepped back at the harsh words and looked up at him in disbelief. He shrugged. Look, I've got to get going. He looked away, then back at her. There is something I wanted to discuss with you. Her voice wavered. What? What more could you have to say? He cleared his throat. He was going to ask her about the plans for his ranch, but it didn't seem the right time anymore, so he'd improvise. I just wanted to say that whatever Miss Maddie needs, I'll take care of it. He watched as color filled her cheeks. Just what makes you think I need your help taking care of my grandmother? Huh? And just answer me this, Chaz. Who will take care of me? Huh? Is anyone in my entire freaking life ever going to take care of me? His mouth fell open. Lisa, She stopped him as a tear escaped. Don't pay any attention to what I just said. I had a moment of weakness and self-pity, that's all. She brushed at the moisture on her cheek with the back of her hand and gave a mocking laugh. I really hate self-pity. You can be assured that I'll be fine. I have Grams and Joe, and I'll just be absolutely fine. New scene. Lisa's eyes flew open. She'd been in a deep sleep, but something woke her. Had she heard something? She sat up. Dixie? The kitten nudged her thigh, and Lisa scooped her up. Hi there, little one. She lay back down, placing Dixie on the pillow next to hers. There now, you go back to sleep. Everything's okay. Yawning, she turned onto her back and stretched just as a gloved hand slapped over her nose and mouth. Arms and legs flew out in startled reflex. Her hands went immediately to the hand that held her down, trying to pry it away from her nose. The dark figure above her leaned forward. Don't scream, or you might wake the little lady downstairs, and then I might have to hurt you. You wouldn't want that to happen, would you? She shook her head as much as she could while he held her. He immediately let her go, and she sucked in air. She tried to get up, but he held her down with one hand braced on her chest. He gave her a push, causing the bed to bounce. Be still. The voice was raspy and gruff, and Lisa looked up, her eyes wild with panic, trying to see who it was that held her. When she didn't stop struggling to rise, he grabbed her hands and pinned them above her head with one of his. He looked her over. Lisa struggled when he stretched his body out on top of her. Not bad, he said, his voice more breathy than the first time he'd spoken. Tears gathered in Lisa's eyes. She was terrified. Please don't do this, she begged. He stood and placed his hand back over her mouth and spoke softly. I said, be quiet. Just listen. Leave here, Lisa. Go far away. Go, and don't look back. You take your city ways and your stupid ideas, and you leave. There's nothing here for you except pain. This is a warning. Next time you won't fare so well. She realized she was screaming, but hardly a muffled sound got past his hand. Her eyes, wide with fear, blinked frantically as they focused on a shiny blade. Like I said, this is merely a warning. Sorry, but it has to be done. I need you to know that I'm not playing around. I'm quite serious. The knife zinged across her upper arm, laying it open. Searing pain shot through her, and her world tilted. Vision became fuzzy, and then he was gone. She reached madly for her cell phone, but couldn't get her arm to do what she wanted, and when she reached for it with her other hand, she toppled out of the bed. The phone landed beside her, and she grabbed it up. 911, what's your emergency? Emergency? Please help. Someone broke in. He cut me with a knife. Please help. New scene. What? Chaz said curtly into the phone as he glanced at the clock. It's 2 a.m. Chaz, it's Tyson. There's just been a call. Someone broke into the Lewis place, assaulted Lisa. I'm not there yet, and they say she's been stabbed. He sprang out of bed, grabbing for his jeans. Where's Mom? Sorry, she's in Atlanta. You're on your own. He threw the phone down and flew around the room. He dressed in under 2 minutes, jumped into his Jeep, and was gone. They were next-door neighbors, so why did it seem to take for freaking ever to get there? He swung in through the gate. Cops were already inside the house, and he came to a screeching halt, bounded up the porch steps, and dashed inside. Where is she? Upstairs, a uniform from the county answered. Hold on, you can't. He's okay, another officer said. That's Chaz Stewart. He used to be a paramedic. Chaz got to the room and came to a halt in the doorway. Blood soaked a pillow laying on the floor and the side of the bed, and she was alive. She was lying on the bed. A county officer held a towel against her arm, and when she saw him, she tried to get up. Stay down, Chaz said softly, moving forward. He laid a hand gently against her shoulder, and she sank back against the bed. He nodded at the uniform. I've got it. Paramedics should be here any minute, Chaz, the officer said. Chaz nodded as he took over pressure on the towel. How bad is it? He asked, not wanting to relinquish pressure long enough to look at it. Pretty deep wound, vertical, maybe a full inch deep, the width of her arm. Get blankets, please. He looked into her eyes and smiled. Hey there. Chaz. She looked up at him, not able to get anything else out, only knew that she was so relieved and grateful that he had come. You're okay. Everything's going to be okay. He bent down and kissed her forehead. You're doing real good, sweetheart. Oops, don't close your eyes. Stay with me now, Lisa, he said sternly. I need you to keep your eyes open and look at me. You're in some pain? She nodded. Yeah, it hurts. Chaz, please, hold me. He sat on the bed and his arms went around her. Okay, hon, I'm here. Her body began to shiver and he leaned closer to keep her warm. Lisa, he said quietly, were you raped? No, I thought he was going to, but he didn't. Chaz sighed with relief. So he attacked you, cut you, and left? Her body trembled violently. He told me to go away and not come back. He took her pulse. I bet you told him to shove it. She laughed softly. She'd just been assaulted in her own bed in her own home, and she felt wonderful. Why? Because Chaz was here, talking to her as if he cared about her, and she knew that made her happy because she loved him. She snuggled against his chest, trying to get closer to his warmth. The police said Grams was okay. Did you see her? She was speaking to an officer when I came through the door. I'm sure she's frantically worried about you. At that moment, the paramedics arrived and Chaz stood aside. You sure? The MT asked pointedly at Chaz. She's yours if you want. Chaz eyed Robert, a former co-worker, as he briefly entertained the thought of tending to Lisa himself. No, you two go ahead. I want her to have the best care. Robert shook his head at Chaz, but this was not the time to have the same old argument with him. Tim, another one of Chaz's friends and former co-workers, knelt down next to Lisa and took over. Chaz stood by and watched. All he could think was, she's alive. She's alive. His eyes met hers. It seemed she could see straight into his soul, and he knew that she knew he truly did care for her. He hadn't been able to hide it, and he hadn't even thought to hide it until now. He watched as his friends took care of her. Her face was pale. Her lips trembled as she spoke to Tim. They started an IV on her. When he realized they were getting ready to transport, he moved forward. Lisa, they're going to take you into the hospital, and I'll be right behind. I promise you won't be alone. Thank you. Her eyes fluttered closed. I'm so tired. That's the shock, baby. He looked worriedly up at Tim. We got her, Chaz. We'll take good care of her. Chaz made his way downstairs. Maddie came to him and he hugged her. She's okay, Maddie. Her arm is cut, but she's okay. And they're going to take her in and stitch her up. I'll take you to the hospital. Thank you, Chaz. I'll get dressed. I won't be a minute. Chaz stepped out onto the porch to see Tyson speaking with the Pine County Police. He moved to his side. What do you know? He came in through the dining room window. Lisa said he was dressed in black. Black mask, black gloves, said the cut was to warn her that he meant business, told her to leave and not look back. Chaz shook his head. Who would do this? Who would care that Lisa's here, living here with Maddie? Tyson's eyes narrowed as he thought, well, she's stepping on someone's toes. Someone is jealous, maybe? I'd say someone like Megan if I didn't know better. Suddenly there's a gorgeous new girl in town come to steal her father's attention. Megan is happy to have a new sister. Besides, they're practically twins. Looks-wise, Megan has nothing to be jealous of. Unless she's a really good actress, I believe she's truly happy that Joe finally found his long-lost daughter. Like I said, if I didn't know better. But what about Andrea? Now, there's someone I wouldn't put it past. Yeah, Andrea would be more likely than Megan, but the perp was a man. Well, Andrea could get anyone to do anything for her. Take her brother, for example. As if on cue, a blue BMW swung through the gate and came to a stop. Marcus climbed out and made his way toward Chaz and Tyson. What are you doing here? Chaz asked. He shrugged nonchalantly. Maddie's my neighbor, too, and I saw the lights and came to see what all the activity is about. He looked toward the house. Is everyone okay? Tyson watched the man carefully as he spoke. Someone broke in. Really? What'd they take? Nothing, but Lisa was hurt. Lisa, is she okay? She's being transported to the hospital. Marcus shook his head. How serious is it? Chaz's eyes pinned him down. Why? Marcus looked him straight in the eye. Well, for one, like I said, we're neighbors. And number two, she and I have a date a week from Saturday. We're going to the Fox. So how bad is she hurt? Chaz couldn't bring himself to deal with Marcus. I have to get Maddie to the hospital. He nodded at his brother. Ty, keep me up to date. New scene. Chaz shifted positions, trying to get comfortable in the waiting room chairs. They would only let one person at a time back with Lisa. Ridiculous. They knew him here, but old Nurse Hatchet wouldn't budge, so he'd let Maddie go in first. He was beginning to wonder if she even intended to come back out and let him have a turn. He shifted again, leaned his head in his hands, and closed his eyes. He was supposed to be driving Lisa away from him for her own good, and he'd intended to make her think that he'd used her and callously tossed her aside. She'd be better off. She needed a man who could be there for her and focus on her, not someone with his kind of baggage. She needed someone who could make love to her and not see another woman. Yet his plan to drive her away wasn't working out too well. The moment he'd entered her bedroom, she'd known he was there because he cared for her. She'd tried to rise up and get to him, which told him she needed him as much as he needed her, and just what the heck was he supposed to do about that? Maddie finally approached, whispering that he could go back now. He did so quickly. She was sleeping. His eyes went to the bandage on her upper arm. A small dot of blood had already soaked through. That's not good. He shouldn't still be It shouldn't still be bleeding that much. He looked up at her face. She was awake and smiling at him. Hey, he said softly. Hey, she said back, mimicking his southern accent. How are you feeling? I feel wonderful. His brow knit in confusion. Wonderful? Maybe they gave her something for pain. He looked down at her arm, and the tiny dot of blood had grown to about the size of a quarter. Maybe he should get the doctor to take a look at it. He looked back at her face. I can't tell you how scared I was for you. Oh, Chaz, you don't ever have to worry about me. She wasn't making any sense. He looked closer at her face. What's this? He asked, brushing at a tiny scratch on her forehead. But as he touched the scratch, it started to bleed. What the heck? He glanced back down to her arm, and the bandage was now completely red, rivulets of blood running down her arm toward her wrist. I have to get the doctor. When he looked back at her face, the tiny scratch was pouring blood. It ran down her face into her eyes. It began to run faster and faster, and then it was like a geyser pumping out of the top of her head. He stumbled back away from her and slipped in a pool of red. Looking down at his feet, he watched in horror as the blood bubbled up around them. Then suddenly he was swimming in it, trying to keep from going under. He couldn't see Lisa anymore. He only knew he had to keep afloat. If he panicked, he would die. A voice from far away called him, and he swam toward it. The voice got louder and louder. It's a dream. This is a dream. Relief swept over him with the realization. His eyes flew open. His mother and father stood over him in the waiting room. Chaz? You okay, honey? Patricia Stewart asked. He stood, scrubbing his hands over his face. He looked back and forth between his mother and father as he got his bearings. Chaz? His mother asked again, worry and concern etched in the soft lines of her face. No, Mom, I'm not. I'm not okay, and I don't know what I'm going to do about it, he said, his voice choked with emotion. His mother stood on her toes and wrapped her arms around him. We'll work it out. We'll get you help. Don't give up. And that is the end of chapter 9.